Hello. Olis. Cute, cute. Welcome. I like it. I like it. People are punctual. Cute. Welcome. How's everyone doing today? So hot in New York, yo. I went for a little run, dance, whatever you want to call it. Hey. Just gonna wait, let some more people gather. Dun, dun. Thank you for being here. Oh. Oh my gosh, hey. How are you?
I'm good. I feel like I'm easing into the week. I feel like I've told that to everybody I've talked to today. Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I just posted this selfie with my strap on. So I was like, let me show it to the world because I've been kind of heated with the way that people just like misgender me all the time. Yeah, I was talking about it with my friends, just how with people on the mask spectrum, like it feels like it doesn't matter how mask I present. Like even if I look masculine on the outside, if I'm wearing a fucking do-rag and a big ass shirt and sneakers and I'm like, yo, like I'm non-binary, people will she, her me to death.
Yeah.
Like even trans people, even people in the community on like, so
Yeah. I mean, I feel like folks' tendency to like snatch into the binary is so real that it's like, first of all, folks don't have to like present within
right.
the binary structure for you to be like, oh, I think we all need to collectively move into a practice of, instead of moving into the default binary, like not assume folks. And I'm constantly checking myself, like, when I'm DMing folks I might not know personally, I'm like, oh, she, and then now I'm trying to retrain myself to just offer everyone just a they and like not make assumptions, because it's like, if there hasn't been that assertion shared, then why am I asserting people for them in terms of their gender and their presentation?
Right. It definitely takes some getting used to. And I feel like, yeah, it's overwhelming. Really is all that I can say, especially as I navigate between like, I organize within like the Spanish speaking community and then also in the English speaking community. And for the most part, like people in the English speaking community are getting there and they understand it. But when I go over to the Spanish speaking community, people will be like, yo, come speak on this panel about non-binariness and then present me as a woman. And then I'm just like,
It makes sense. Yeah, that's real. That is very real.
Yeah, thank you for listening, though. I know I just opened up and I just threw out the feelings.
Yeah, that's what we do.
I'm gonna start presenting the event, the live. I see people are here saying hello. They're in heart eyes. I see some familiar faces. What's good, y'all? Welcome to In Honor of Our Roots, everyone. For those of y'all who have never taken part in Honor of Our Roots, In Honor of Our Roots is a grassroots event series that aims to provide a brave space for queer creators of color to delve into, share, and document their coming to be / roots. So we use workshops, vendors, experimental performances, exhibitions that revolve around self-reflection themes, and we aim to activate what we call a queer imagination to encourage our community's spiritual autonomy and explore collective ancestry, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And so just a little bit more about collective ancestry, which, by the way, all of the ideologies shared in In Honor of Our Roots are like written by people a part of In Honor of Our Roots. So these are like new theories. We're aware that people might have not heard of these terms before, which is also why we're trying to have these lives, right? So we can like speak more about it. When people come to our space, they have a better understanding. So at In Honor of Our Roots, we define collective ancestry as the meeting of the different ancestors and deities we are each comprised of in moments and spaces of gathering, right? Especially gatherings where we invoke spiritual conversation through art. It speaks to the fact that we exist and operate in mosaic temporalities rather than linear timelines. That when we converse with each other in the material realm, our ancestors are conversing in the spiritual, right? So collective ancestry prompts us to consider what the meaning of these histories mean for us and for the people that come after us. And collective does not mean universal, rather it speaks to the bringing together of, the uniting of multiple traditions that resonate within one theme or space, the ability to consent and reach out to the many or any ancestors and deities present when we are talking, communing, sharing space, right? Very Afrofuturistic. I want to name Black Quantum Futurism, the collective, and like their series of books for really opening up my mind on this trail of thought. They've done a lot of work around like decolonizing time and being able to redefine the self from a place that's not just like, this is my history, this is where I come from. Rather, like, my history is in me now and walks with me. So I have the ability to define myself moving forward. And for this live, we reached out to Niki, right? I feel like me and Niki have been following each other for years. Literally, like, I moved to DR and then I came back, and like I literally remember you commenting on this picture that I uploaded where I was wearing this green outfit before I left to DR. And I left to DR like 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a minute. It's been a minute. So I'm glad that this is happening. It feels like very long overdue.
Right. And so we reached out to Niki because, like, I feel like I've also seen a lot of your evolution from afar, like as an organizer, and I've seen you like with Femme Power MIA, like, and all the different branches that have come out from that since that has started. Like, I've seen you get into facilitation. I've seen you like start a podcast, like, I've seen you do so many things, right? And we thought that it was very relevant because as an organizer and as someone who does all of these different things, well, you have to deal with people of different cultures from different places. And so we thought it would be really cool to hear your perspective on the topic. And I'm just going to shortly introduce you, share your bio out loud before, you know, if you want to share anything after that. But Niki Franco, and let me know if I'm pronouncing that right.
You got it.
Awesome. Niki Franco is an abolitionist, socialist, community organizer, writer, and facilitator of spaces for collective study. She is seeking to disrupt the institutionalized, bureaucratic frameworks of academia and transactional ways in which relationships exist under capitalism. Her work experiments with truth-telling, radical history and thought, and revolutionary imagination. She also curates educational and cultural programming that navigates the current urgency on global solidarity, environmental and ancestral preservation, and strategies on building emotional and intellectual capacities to dismantle systems of oppression that inform and deform our current lives, period. Okay? She is the host of Getting to the Roots of It with Venus Roots, a podcast that leans into conversations with artists, theorists, and organizers. You getting mad love in the
Yes.
on the side right there. You just saw the hearts like going like that.
Well, thank you so much. It's funny because it's like I typically only read it, and it's such a mouthful, but it felt really nice for you to read it. It felt very flowy and poetic.
Of course, you deserve. So, oh, I'm realizing I didn't present myself.
Yeah.
So, hey everyone, I'm Morena Espiritual. I am a performance artist, an educator, an organizer. I'm one of the organizers of In Honor of Our Roots. I also currently form part of this collective called Azabache Arte, which is an Afro-centered art platform and collective with extension in Bogota, Colombia. Yeah, and I mean, y'all see me on the internet. I do like 20 things, but it is what it is. So, now if you just want to maybe say anything else about yourself, share your pronouns again before we get into these questions, I am going to be pinning your Cash App to this live so that people can send you monies if they feel called to.
Yeah, well, thank you again for that beautiful introduction. It feels very nice to have someone else read your words for you. But yeah, my name is Niki Franco. I am Venus Roots on the Instagram digital world, and I use she and her pronouns, and I'm Miami based.
Cute. Shout out to Miami. Shout out to Miami.
It could be hard. It is. It's a lot down here, but yes, shout out to Miami.
Yo. What do you mean by it can be hard?
I think Miami is just a city that, is known for a million and one things, but it is really, I mean, and this is true of everywhere, but I think the starking difference of income, of wealth, of access, of resources in Miami is just so sharp that it's a little bit hard to just, like ignore it. I think when folks think of Miami, they think of like the palm trees of South Beach, of Ocean Avenue, the Art Deco, or maybe like the luxurious mansions where celebrities live. And, that's not our reality. We're a city that has served like foreign capital for so long and has served for development and real estate, and has not served the community and people, so I think that's what I mean by hard. And I think there are really complicated histories that exist in this place. I think sometimes people say, oh, Miami's a place that's all, it's super diverse and it's people of color. And, I think as much as I do love Miami because it's my home and I've spent my entire life here, I think it's a misjudgment to say that this is a diverse, accepting, welcoming place. It's a place with a lot of anti-Black roots, anti-Black pervasiveness, even from people of color, even from immigrants, and us as Caribbean folks, like we know what that's like. And yeah, I think seeing it like unfold in real life is like it's just hurtful. You don't. I think some folks think just because it's like, oh, we all speak Spanish, like we all can, and it's just not like that. I wish, I wish it was like that, but you and I know that very well. It ain't all the same. And that's actually why I posted that post yesterday, I think that was, where it was talking about the complexities of like racial identity within this Latinx cultural community. That we ain't all the same, and that's not we have very different histories, and I think people we share a lot at the same time, but I think people want to dismiss the fact that slavery existed all across Latin America, and that people have the European ancestry of the folks that and the indigenous dispossession happened. So I think that's frustrating because I'm so invested in solidarity across race and I would love to be just building with my folks, you know, and but yeah, I think we gotta, you know, we gotta unpack some things, you know, before we can build deep, we have to be willing to just, you know, go beyond the surface. And I think sometimes folks want to like hide behind the guise of like, oh, I'm Latina, I'm Latino, I'm Latinx, I'm this, I'm that, I'm an immigrant, to not take accountability of the ways in which they themselves or their families growing up have said anti-Black, anti-Indigenous things to, you know, and have held that framework to be true. So yeah, it's less of a like, oh, we ain't the same, but it's like we do have particular histories that I think we can build so much more if we can recognize our realities and the context of it, and then just keep it pushing.
Right. I mean, and also I think that like when it comes to Latinidad, right, it becomes almost like this tool, or like it becomes this tool for people to not do introspection, right? It becomes this like, well, we're all Latinx, so it doesn't matter. But it's like, actually, sweetie, it does matter, because when people come over here and they're like, I'm Latinx, this is my culture. What's your culture? Salsa made by Black people? Let me know. What's your culture? Reggaeton made by Black people? If you talk to Black Latinx people and indigenous Latinx people, they could tell you their culture. They know where they come from. You know, it be the white Latinx that cling on to Latinidad. That's such a harsh identity. Like most Black Latinx people that I know, they hate the word Latinx or Latinidad as a concept. They're like, what is that? That does not represent me. Indigenous people be like, bruh, it's like, I know indigenous people that don't even fuck with the concept of nationality, period, because they're like, that's the name that the colonizer put on where I live. So yeah, you know, if that's how they feel about nationality, you think that indigenous people are over here priding themselves on like Latinidad.
Yes.
You know, it just becomes this thing for people to like gaslight, you know, for people to act like we don't see Black people on TV and it's okay because we're all Latinx, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's funny. Like, I was just thinking, like, damn, you know, to your point of like things like salsa, things like reggaeton that are Black genres, as they all are, that you would like, I feel like if you weren't Puerto Rican or, you know, whatever, you would think based on the reggaetoneros making it to the mainstream, I'm thinking of Bad Bunny, I'm thinking of J Balvin, I'm thinking a Daddy Yankee, a Wisin y Yandel. I don't, you know, the list goes on and on and on and on. And I'm like, we need to interrogate why you know, first of all, you would think that Puerto Rico is a white ass island, which is not true. And secondly, you would, you know, people dismiss that. You know, I remember seeing Karol G post in the midst of the Black, you know, this Black uprising we're in, where people are making very serious demands regarding police brutality, you know, the legacy of slavery, the legacy of Jim Crow in this country. And she posted like a dog of her Dalmatian and in Spanish said like, you know, this is just, we're just better off like when we get along, like Black and white. And it's like, what? You know, and you know, when people tried to come for her like, yo, you're on some anti-Black shit, this is hella insensitive, she's like, what are you talking about? I'm Latina. And it's like, no one gives a fuck. But you know, we know the type of people that cling on to that, and I think people are, a lot of conversations are surfacing, and I hope that people take this conversation seriously and like this topic and question like, why do they cling on to Latinidad? What does that really mean? and and just be straight up like, all the countries in America, all the countries in the Caribbean might not have the same exact race relations and same exact context as the United States, but we have very similar hierarchies and not that different of histories when it comes to slavery, dispossession of land. You know, people be acting like slavery wasn't a thing in Latin America. I'm like, yes, it was. Yes, you know, I don't care that we're from the same country. Like, you know, but yeah, that's a whole separate thing. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, it was necessary though. Like, we just trashed Latinidad. I appreciate it.
I'm like, that's a whole separate
Necessary things. I think it had a lot of resonance for a couple of people listening to
the hearts. I'm so cool.
I'm gonna start these questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
for this interview because we like 20 minutes in.
Let's do it.
um so the first question, very simple, just if you could tell us a little bit about your journey with organizing and how it started, what made you want to organize, like what was the first things that you did once you realized that you wanted to organize and that was a part of your path?
Yeah, I love this question because I feel like um, I love hearing folks' story of self and like, what are the moments informing who they are. So I love that question, first off. I think just a little background on me is my parents are very working class. My mom works at Publix, which is like probably I would say the most popular grocery store down in Florida, and they have locations like across the South. And my dad does maintenance and plumbing. But we were able to land a slot on this mixed income, like government subsidized apartment complex in a pretty wealthy white Latinx suburb um, here in Miami. So from a young age, I obviously did not have the language for it, but from a young age, I think some things I knew was um, I had a lot of ideas around like class and race being these like determining factors of the way in which you live, the way in which people perceive you, and the way that people value you or don't. So although I didn't have the language for it, I knew from a very young age, all the folks around me in my class, my peers had tons of money. And that was obviously not my reality. I remember being really like ashamed because my mom worked at, or still does, at the like grocery store, which everyone would go to and would recognize her. And there was just so much shame in that, like shame around poverty. So yeah, but it was a strange experience because obviously because of proximity to wealth, being in the school, being in that neighborhood, I also, had a lot of privileges that I wouldn't have been afforded had I lived in somewhere else that actually matched up our income and like our class status. And I think the whole, back to our earlier point on Latinidad, you know, the first people who were racist towards me and anti-black towards me were Latinos, like, or, Latinx folks in my classes, immigrants. And so from a young age, all of these things that people kind of hold to be true, they were just clashing based on my experiences for a long time. And I moved to this neighborhood when I was in third grade and graduated from there. So it was essentially all my school years. And I also believed from a young age that the amount of money you have or the amount of resources you have does not reflect merit and does not reflect how hard you work. Because I remember my parents just working all the time, working weekends. My mom would sometimes have to close the store at midnight and then be home at 12:30. Our schedules were very clashing. So I knew from a young age, like, working hard does not equate resources. Working hard does not equate wealth, period. Then as I grew older, I came to learn a lot of things, capitalism, the myth of meritocracy. But I did know that from a young age. And I did know that there was difference between me and my peers. Granted, still a bunch of privileges, being light skinned, being able to be like ambiguous if I was relaxing my hair, staying out of the sun, et cetera, et cetera. But still knowing like there are significant differences between me and my peers. I think, fast forward, throughout the years. For me, like Obama getting elected was like my high school years, and his second term was the first time I voted. Back then, I was very excited about that. Um, but it was also a time where I was like being radicalized by Tumblr. Like Tumblr was really cool back then, but I was being politicized by Tumblr, and it was the first time I like learned about um, Syria and this president Obama, who I in the moment really loved and was like excited to have a black president, was bombing folks, brown folks, black folks across the globe, and it just kind of like, it kind of split my mind in half. I like couldn't make sense of it. I was also privileged to have some amazing leftist teachers actually in high school in this strange neighborhood. That really exposed me to like really amazing stuff, really amazing texts. I will always have so much love for teachers that actually care about their students and want to see them more than just test takers. but actually people who are in their process of coming of age and coming to identity. But I think when it really just sort of snapped is 2012 was my senior year in high school, and that was also the year that Trayvon Martin was killed, which happens here in Florida, in Sanford, Florida, which is about like 3 hours and a half, maybe 4 hours. And that's when I was like, all right, there's some fundamental fucked up shit in this country that is too embedded into the system. Again, I was still young, you know, I'm 17. I was 17 then, so I, you know, but there was in like my intuition knew like, okay, there seems to be so many patterns of violence towards similar bodies in this country. Why? Then college starts, and oh, college is a whole nother experience. But I think the main things for me was being exposed to folks who had radical politics, like, and you know, who I actually like really connected with. And I think something that really changed my life also was studying Latin American and Caribbean history. You know, and I know you're Dominican, and like, yeah, like we have a very dark history that has a direct relationship to the United States. You know, when we think of coups, when we think of blanqueamiento, when we think of why are our islands so anti-Black and want to claim everything but the Blackness that is inherent to their islands, we think of why. And, you know, the US has so much blood in their hands around that. So when I started learning all of that, I mean, you know, the connections are just made. You don't even have to try. It's just, you know, it's, you know, matemática básica. It's just 1+1. And, you know, I was involved in like positions of leadership, but doing very different stuff. Like, I didn't think of it as organizing. It was more like, I used to be a pre-med student back in college. So it was more like health inequities. But I was still in like a role of like educating folks as to why there was health inequities in the first place. So that was back then. And, you know, with the founding that Helen did of FemPower and me being really closely involved from the beginning, thinking around like, you know, back to Miami being a pretty regressive place, not just politically, but like socially. I think people think of it as like a super liberal place, and it's not. And it is very anti-left, significantly anti-left. I would actually probably argue one of the most anti-left cities in the entire country. Yeah, and I was like, why is that? You know, we actually have a history that should not make us anti-left. We actually should have a history that makes us anti-imperialists, period. So I came up with the book club, and around that same time, I also started kind of like my full-time organizing position at Power U, which I'm still with them. It's been almost 3 years. And yeah, we work particularly with Black and brown young people, working to like decarcerate our schools, fighting for these people in power who don't care about public anything to actually stop privatizing everything that we deserve. And yeah, there's a million and one things. I'm sorry I was a long-winded answer, but I wanted to give you some context. I think sometimes people think that our identities like exist in a vacuum without acknowledging that there's so much trauma often and so many things that inform who we are and why we believe the world to be in the way that we do. You know, I didn't get into leftism because of white bros online. I got into leftism because I'm seeing my parents in their 60s work like dogs, and I've seen them do nothing but work hard and be good people, and you know, be continuously extracted from in this country and by corporations and capitalists. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a fact. I relate to that a lot, because I feel like it's so interesting, especially as I keep close contact with people on the island in DR. And you know, the assumption when people see people in New York, especially out of all places, is like, oh, you're living good, like you got everything figured out, you're good. Meanwhile, like I realized the other day, like actually, like I actually don't relate to half of y'all who live in the capital. And like, it's just like I'm in New York City because my family is from a farm side in the Dominican Republic where they were so poor that they had family members dying because they could not afford to take them to the hospital. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, it's never really like, I'm sorry, like, oh, you can stay over there? like you can actually afford to stay over there and be alive. Like I can't relate. Me and my family, we can't relate. So and then yeah, similarly, like, you know, living in New York, my family has lived in this apartment for at least like 20 to 30 years, right? So the rent is like controlled rent from back then. If this rent was the same amount that like it's that rent in New York City is now, like
yeah.
But yeah, that's what that made me think of, because similarly, like I feel like my own experiences have radicalized me, and if anything, like each day more and more I continue to realize the amounts of trauma that have informed where I am, you know. And because it's like it gets so normalized at a certain point that maybe we don't even think about it in that way. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't think of myself and my family as displaced people, right? Because also the narrative around displacement usually centers like people from like Mexico and like Central America, like is the whole immigration conversation, you feel me? So when it came to that narrative, like I never thought of myself as like a Dominican person, as a displaced, as you know, coming from a family seeking refuge. But then it's like when I look at the facts, low key,
yeah, high key. Straight up.
Well, next question that we got for you is as a facilitator of spaces for collective study, you hold space not only for the people who are learning with you, but also their psyches, their lineages, the spiritual beings that might even walk with them, right? So how might this inform your practice?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful framing of the question. And yeah, it resonates. I think, you know, I don't think of collective study and I don't think of the process of one coming into our political and ideological understanding as just that. I think the reason why we have to be in collective study and in collective study of radical text, of radical history, of is really the work of coming to ourselves, right? Like what I was saying earlier is like most folks don't even know the history or the legacies that they even come from. Most folks don't even know truly what position in society they occupy. And that's all intentional by the system. The more confused you have the masses, the easier it will be for the elite to sort of continue to move their agenda as they do. But I think, you know, when I think of when I think of collective study and facilitating that space, particularly in Miami, I think it is healing work. You know, I don't necessarily think of myself as a healer, and I wouldn't necessarily, you know, I think folks, you know, have particular gifts and roles. But I do think, you know, I've been in a room, in my living room, right? And we are studying essentially, and people are crying because people are feeling like, wow, you know, to your point, like, wow, I had never realized I've been displaced, or like, wow, I had never thought of the complicated relationship I have with my father, part of like a response to state violence. Like, wow, I had never thought of X, Y, and Z. And we carry all of that in our bodies, in our soul, in our psyche, all of it. You know, I think what study, collective study, and learning history has offered me is a feeling of wholeness, like knowing I'm not alone, and the pain and the trauma that I have, that my body has, that my soul carries, is not just mine. You know, we're in a process of collective healing. But in order to do that, we also need to know where we come from. I think you mentioned something that really fascinated me earlier. Like, I think for Black folks, or for, you know, I don't want to speak for Indigenous folks, but I think for us, sometimes it's like we're not given the opportunity to exist in any aspect of time. It's either like, oh, in the past, this was this. Oh, and then in the future, maybe y'all will find freedom. But knowing that we exist in every dimension of time, our past informs our future, our past informs our now. How we move now will impact what it is, you know, the world that we're living in tomorrow and the day after. But yeah, I think it's more than just studying. I think it's more than just like, oh, we reading. It's like we learning the truth that we must know about ourselves, our people, in order to lead lives of truth, to lead lives of community over the individual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think to your question, I I don't take it lightly. I don't think of it as just, oh, we're having a good time, here's a syllabus, or, hey, let's read this book. I try to really be fully present, and I try to offer folks that I'm in space with a real opportunity of just establishing themselves and what they're coming with, obviously within a container, right? But yeah, I try to be very present, and I'm very extremely intentional about my facilitation, because I think what we're studying is the people we are today. And that's sometimes hard. I think you and I have mentioned the word trauma so many times on this call already. And that speaks volumes, like straight up. And, when you're in a room filled with people of color who don't know their history, we're just on survival mode all the time. Yeah, it's going to be hurtful. And it's like, wow, like we're owed so much and we've been robbed of so much. But there's always the flip side, there's all, like in any crisis, there's opportunity for transformation. But I don't take it lightly. To your original question, I take facilitation very seriously, and I think anyone who's been in shared space with me knows that I try to show up as present as I can.
Word. I relate to that. I feel you. I personally, as a facilitator, I feel like I have to make sure I'm in a very grounded space.
Yeah, straight up. Yeah.
Because shit comes up. It's like me, I facilitate a lot around like dance, particularly like movement, but it does get, into like political stuff. But emotions come up. Like I've had classes where like people start crying, where like, we got props in the room, the props break. And I just have to remind myself, like, I'm asking people to reflect about like deep things. So it makes sense that these reactions are happening and it's all a part of the healing, essentially, and like it's valid and it's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I definitely resonated a lot with it. You speak a lot about like ancestral practices, and so and like learning about where you come from. So the next question is about like, how does your own relationship to your ancestors and your lineage shape your practices?
Yeah, I think for a long time I didn't really relate to the sort of super spiritual side of myself, my being. And I think there's tons of reasons for that that I probably won't get into here. Um, but I think in the most recent years, I have come to understand healing, ancestral preservation as crucial to the work that I do, and as crucial to myself existing in a sort of bountiful way in this life that is invested in keeping us down. So I've completely shifted that perspective. I used to think that these things, like, if you would have asked me this question a few years ago, I'd be like, nah, what you talking about? I don't do none of that shit. But now I have many different rituals, from keeping my altar to asking, my ancestors to sort of guide me and provide me resilience, because I think the work that we do is very difficult. And it's very emotionally charged and it's exhausting. I don't want to feel on the offensive and defensive at the same time all the time. I just, I want to just live in joy and peace and community like everyone else. But I also have a lot of rage within me, and I have a lot of anger within me. And I think the most connected I can feel to my ancestors, the most um, effective I'm going to be with that rage. So to ensure that it's not violent, to not ensure that it's abusive, to not ensure that it's harmful or hurtful, but rather that it's principled and that it's guided, and that it transforms from rage into change, from rage into community building, from rage to sharing out, exchanging resources. But yeah, I mean, in the last couple of years, I've changed from being a very angry person, you know, and visibly so, to a person that feels much more centered and grounded in my surroundings, even when, you know, I feel like I'm in a storm. Um, I think the more connected I get to my ancestors and my guides, the better I've been and the happier I have felt. So I don't take it lightly anymore. I don't take it, you know, again, like I used to think that it was not important. And yeah, I've learned very differently so. And yeah, I think I experiment with different types of rituals. And I think whenever I'm in conversation with healers, I think something that I've heard from all of them is that my guides and my ancestors are always very present in the calling. And I feel like I keep that in mind all the time. That even if I'm still pretty early into my journey of being connected to my folks who might not be on this physical realm, um, that they're holding me, and that folks who are more attuned to that are reaffirming. You know, sometimes I feel like despite it all, I'm a very lucky person, and I think it's because I got a lot of ancestors and guides holding me down. So yeah, I'm still early in my journey of knowing how to sort of extend myself to them and let them know that I'm here for listening and I'm here to, you know, sort of just take guidance, and learn. But I think that when I do connect, we connect deeply.
For sure. And I also think that like I think that I relate in I'm like, how do I say this, right? Like, I feel like what you're speaking about is like a conscious connection to your ancestors, right? Like one that your mind can fathom. Because I think that you already have a connection to your ancestors, right? Because they guide you in all of the work that you do. If you feel like the work that you do is meant to be, if you feel like you're meant to be doing the work that you're doing, like your ancestors and your guides have helped you and have guided you up until that point. You know, if people enter your facilitation spaces and they feel safe enough to decompress, like you best believe that your ancestors and your guides have helped you arrive to that moment. I think it's like getting a hold of that mental conscious, like this is how they talk to me, but it's like they already been talking, right? Because I relate in trying to do something very similar, and then I talk to people like mediums or whatever, and they're like, they tell me the shit that I already know. They're like, your ancestors connect with you in this way, and I'm like, oh, that's why I feel so grounded when I do, like, you know, they're like, oh yeah, like your ancestors talk to you through dreams and they like channel into you when you dance. And I'm like, duh, like I felt that, I knew that, and anybody who sees me when I dance knows that shit too, right? But
Yeah.
it's just like my mind hadn't understood it or said it to myself in English, I guess.
Mm.
um but they're always with us, you know, and I bet that they're always with you too.
Yes. I love that. And thank you for that reminder, because I feel like sometimes, especially in this society, like if things are not super materially present, we sometimes disregard it as being present. Um, and yeah, I think exactly what you said feels so true. I'm like, yeah, no, they've been guiding me to this place, and you know, yeah, like some folks have been like, yeah, I don't know what it is. Every time I walk into your home, I've always felt super safe. You know, even people who like don't know me, um, and I'm like, okay, I don't think that's just me. You know, there has to be sort of some holding of me and the space I can provide for folks, because I'm not this super like person. You know, I'm pretty low key for the most part. But yeah, no, I thank you for that reminder, because I completely agree.
Of course, of course. We out here, we guided. I feel like capitalism and like academia makes us think that if we're not articulating things using words, that it's not real. But
Mm.
that's the biggest joke. Like we shouldn't have to justify our spiritual experiences always in writing or in English for
Mm.
them to exist, you know? If we feel it, it's happening.
Yeah.
Um, but on that note, more things that capitalism and like academia sort of condition us into is like this linear notion of time, right? Of the strict past, present, future. And so at In Honor of Our Roots, something that we really play with and toy with is the idea that there, like, time is more of a malleable process, right? Hence why in another part of the country it's another time, period, right? Like that is like the most straightforward, like easiest example. Like if time is so linear, why is it like 10 p.m. somewhere else and it's like about to be 9 over here? Like clearly something is something is off, right? And so you know, here we acknowledge that the linear concept of time has been established through colonization as a control tactic. I'm not sure if you've like read on it, but literally like the linear way that we understand time was employed through like when people had slaves as a way to like measure labor, right? As a way to be like, how do I know how, like, when is this enslaved person done enough work for me? Like, how do I measure that? That's when they started to employ time. When they were bringing people in ships over here, they're like, how do we know when the ship is going to arrive? How do we measure these things that you know that we're not supposed to be doing? And that's when time comes into play. So we wanted to ask you what your stance is on time and yeah, how it influences the way that you move in the world.
Yeah, I think this was probably the hardest question for me. I think for the sake of being transparent, because I mean, I have a few thoughts. I think organizing and the work of community organizing is very slow work. It is very slow work. It contradicts the pace of which we are encouraged to exist in. You know, we are so obsessed with outcomes, we're so obsessed with results, and we're so obsessed with like instant gratification in whatever capacity that might be. And organizing is never going to be like that. Organizing is slow. It takes the work of building relationship, of strategizing slowly, of adaptation, of rebuilding all over again. And I'm constantly in that like milieu. So I think that has sort of allowed me to distance myself a little bit from this sense of like this linear time and linear sense of like, because I think the linear time also encourages urgency, like, and that's very capitalistic, you know, just consumption driven, production driven. So I think being and organizing and moving at a much slower pace in terms of not so much work, but in terms of how the pace of things. Um, it's allowed me to recognize that, yeah, this like the typical idea of time, like, oh, this is what you're supposed to do in X amount of years, and in this time frame you should do this, and this is how much work you should do in one day, and then you repeat, is something that like doesn't make sense in my head. um I think I also, um you know, to your point, I'm thinking like, what is our ancestral understanding and orientation towards time? I've been gardening a lot more. This is the first year I have a gardening practice, and because of it, I feel much closer to like the natural world. I'm spending a lot more time in my yard. I spend time growing plants from seed, watching them blossom, have a different orientation around time that, you know, I don't know if it's an immediate answer to your question, but it has challenged, yeah, these ideas of like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, 1 year. That I think it's much more interested in the observation of patterns, in the observation of seasons, in the observation of the natural course of how things think. There are plants that I have that are fruit trees and they grow slow. They need lots of nurture and they grow slow. And that's just it. There are things that are quick. And again, I don't know if it's a super direct response, but I think when you ask me this idea of time, linear or otherwise, um, I have all these teachers, right? Teachers in nature, teachers in my work, and in the nature of my work that contradict that. And it also makes me think of Afrofuturism, right? Kind of what I said earlier, like we don't just exist in the past and then maybe in the future. You know, every dimension of time and of history is constantly living within us, and it's constantly impacting us. And I try, and I embody that. I try to be mindful of that. You know, I'm not just this like solo dolo in this universe. I'm carrying centuries of history within me every single day, and there will be future generations that will be, you know, having some resemblance of what I've done in this life that will also carry on. So yeah, I think people have weird connotations of time, not just in the sense that you offered, but also just like very weird time and age milestones, things that we are quote unquote supposed to have accomplished or supposed to have done. Um, and yeah, they never feel good. I'm like, who came up with these goals? Um, and yeah, they seem very urgent. You know, I'm gonna, you know, my partner just turned 30 this year, and we were just talking about like, yeah, who came up with these ideas around, oh, you know, where's the car or the house or your partnership or the job or, you know, all these like demarcations of what it means to be successful. Of what it means to be successful and someone deserving in this society, which I think, you know, for us is like, what? That makes no sense. But yeah, I don't know. Very strange notions of time under capitalism.
Word. What you're saying makes me think of ritual, which I feel like is a very ancestral way of connecting to time. Like what you said about organizing, about like it's like, and I say ritual because it's like always returning to that point, right? Which for me is similar as well with organizing. Like it's like, yeah, like, you know, we don't know what's gonna happen. Like in this pandemic, it was like a pandemic hit, then then the protests got even more fired up. They got fired up at a global scale. Like the only thing guaranteed though was the fact that me and my organizing team, we got like to meet twice in the week. You know what I'm saying? And then we come back together and we re-strategize. Sometimes you got to drop projects. Sometimes you got to start new projects. Sometimes you got to evaluate what's going good, what's going bad. But I think it's the ritual of coming together, right? And similarly with the plants that you're talking about, like it's like just coming back, letting the tide hit, coming back to check in with your plant teachers, with your nature teachers, and seeing where they at. And not holding some wild, like, you know, not holding the expectation for your one tree onto your other plant, just letting them do what they do. And I relate to those milestones. I was talking about that with my friend last night, like where people are like, oh, you're 30, like you want your own house. Like, I'm like, yo, I'm trying to like hop from commune to commune. Like, and if I have a house, I'm trying to have a chosen family that we all like contribute to the house. Like, who said I'm trying to own a house? Who's trying to own a house on stolen land, first of all? Like, that's just, that don't make sense to me. But that being said, we have some time for some audience questions. Very briefly, I think we got like 5 minutes. There was already a question that somebody asked up here that I can read out loud to you. That's
Yeah.
K Nia Spora asks, what are some resources y'all have leaned on to strengthen your perspective and presence as facilitators?
Oh, that's a great question, and that's also my boo. Hi, honey. Um, I think there's nothing like practice, like being in practice that will teach you, at least for me. Um, and a book that I think has been incredibly helpful for me is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Um, I think what I love about the book, and as a facilitator, this is a tendency I have. I love questions. Um, I just love questions. They're openings. They're openings that allow people to step into their agency, but also kind of just, you know, create create a little bit of a framework, you know? So I love questions. I love prompts that are rooted in question. So yeah, that has been a really helpful book. Of course, being in practice, and I also think you know, because I organize alongside young people, seeing how people learn to facilitate also, like learning by observing others coming into their own practice has been really telling for me. I'm like, oh my God, I remember when I used to do that. Or, you know, I'm like, oh yeah, like that would make me super nervous, or, you know, and constantly like reevaluating and connecting with them around like, hey, and processing as people are learning to do these things as well. So yeah, just learning exchange is really important for me in general, not just facilitation, in general. Um, and the name of the book is Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown.
Word. Yeah, I just wrote the name of the book. I'm not sure if anyone else has a question they want to ask. I will, to add on to what you were saying, I really agree. I lean on questions OD too, but I recommend to anyone trying to get into facilitating to watch the documentary Schooling the World. That basically, it just talks about the ways in which the Western education system has been a source of like imperialism basically into other countries, and it just talks about indigenous ways of gaining knowledge and compares it to like Western ways of gaining knowledge, and the importance of like connection building versus like deconstructing. That really changed my entire point of view as to what I was trying to do in the room. So yeah, here we got 2 questions. I think that this one on your ancestors you low-key kind of answered, so I'm gonna read the second one, which says, in terms of connection with nature and its influence with our relationship with time. Oh, it wasn't a question, it's a recommendation. The Lonely Hour podcast episode with Jenny Odell is really good. But someone asked, how does one heal ancestral trauma?
Yeah, you know, I don't have a sophisticated answer for that. But I think something that has been helpful for me is I've been recently in a practice of somatics with a somatics practitioner. I also just got this book called The Politics of Trauma. I haven't started it yet, but I'm very excited to start it this week. Yeah, I think body work has been really helpful for me, because I'm someone that hasn't been super emotionally attuned. You know, I grew up in a Caribbean household where like we didn't cry, and you know, you kind of just had to be hard. And now I'm coming to understand a lot of trauma that I've, you know, lived through and hold and well. And I think body work has been really helpful to identify where it lives in my body and how to move through it by reconnecting to my body in a totality and wholeness. So yeah, somatics, and yes, thank you. The Politics of Trauma is a book, but there's tons of resources around somatics, generative somatics that have been really helpful.
So I think there's about a minute left on the live.
Oh yeah, because then they kick you out. It's very abrupt. They don't even give you a little like beep beep.
So maybe if you want to just like share a project or where people can find you after this live.
Yes. Instagram, Venus Roots, that is my digital persona. But I mostly want to thank you for the time. Thank you for your thoughtful questions, and thank you for offering me this space in the first place. I feel like we said, like, we've been long overdue. We've witnessed each other's evolution through so many years. So it was just really beautiful to get to talk to you, and for folks to be chiming in. I'm really grateful and appreciative.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, please send your coin to Niki. She's also on Patreon putting out content. So if y'all use Patreon, y'all should consider subscribing on there. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. This shit is counting down to like the
everyone. Have a beautiful week. And this has set the tone for my week and a really beautiful